Hello and welcome to Moneylife. This is Sucheta Dalal. Today we are revisiting infrastructure leasing and financial services, which went sort of belly up in 2018, and one of the key projects that it had called Gift City in Gujarat, which today is a prestige project of the state. Well, it has been a prestige project of the state since 2007, when it first made a big splash at Vibrant Gujarat, and then things have been up and down. Those of you who've been watching this video blog regularly and reading my columns in Moneylife would have read at least 3 other stories on what has been happening with the controversial Gujarat International Financial Tech City just outside Gandhinagar, which is known as Gift City. This was supposed to be a global financial center on par with Dubai, Shanghai, Songdo in Korea, and it's built over this massive 886 acres of land. It's got a multi-service special economic zone. It's got an international financial services center and a domestic tariff area. Now let me start with the good news. It's finally working in sorts. So banks are finally making a beeline there. What we have today is definitely a scale down model, but it is actually got moving after the Gujarat government, which started out as a joint venture partner with IL&FS, took over the 50% once IL&FS was into some kind of resolution, and they have put their own people in charge, and they're attracting a lot of industry, business, banks who are finally coming there. The exchanges that have been set up there have also begun operations, and things are not looking bad at all. One sticky area remains, which is what is left behind by the discredited former management because of the manner in which they did business. And ironically enough, this is the role of Fairwood Consultants Pvt Ltd, I'm going to call it Fairwood, which in fact put together the global consortium to build what in the past looked like this very, very ambitious and grand plan, which only someone like the state of Gujarat would have the temerity to set up and actually achieve. So here's the story. It's quite fascinating. In 2011, Fairwood found its contract unceremoniously terminated. So 2007, a huge, dramatic, vibrant Gujarat splash, and 2011, Fairwood is out of the picture. Its work is called into question. There are substantial dues that are going to be claimed from it. Fairwood says it has not been paid for much of its work, and everything was pushed into arbitration, which, believe it or not, did not have a single hearing or get resolved for sure for over 10 years. In fact, the reason why this story comes up today is they finally had a hearing at the end of last month. And a lot of stuff that I'm talking about has come out of that and of the papers that came out of that hearing, and my conversation with the chairman of Fairwood, Mr. Ranveer Sarandas. Now, what happened in August was Ramakant Jha, who was former CEO of Gift City, was being cross-examined as part of this arbitration. It was supposed to go on for 5 days, but after 2 days he got up and went. That's how it works. Why? Don't ask me. The next hearing is in November. But look at what comes out from the documents. It just points to the bizarre manner in which IL&FS used to operate and arm twist smaller companies, which looked on it as this giant conglomerate of 300 odd companies, which had enormous clout with every state government in India. So, Gift City was indeed a victim of the global financial crisis. In fact, most memoranda of understanding that were signed up in Vibrant Gujarat in 2007 failed to materialize, and a massive white elephant of a project was left behind, which has since then been systematically scaled down. This meant that everything designed by Fairwood on a grand scale was unworkable and no longer needed. Typical of the IL&FS playbook that's evident from other projects, Fairwood was unceremoniously sacked, and the dispute with the consortium was pushed into arbitration and conveniently delayed. This was done knowing fully well that Fairwood and the consortium was in right from day one. Now, here's the story that Mr. Das says. According to him, in spite of IL&FS's name with infrastructure right in the beginning, it had absolutely no expert team inside to build large projects, design them, evaluate them, anything. It always worked through partners with expertise like him. In any case, no large projects or cities can be done alone by any company. There are always consultants who put together the group with individual areas of expertise. So, Fairwood used to work with IL&FS. It has worked on 10 or 12 projects, had a great equation. In fact, such a good equation that IL&FS had given its own visiting cards, IL&FS visiting cards, to top executives of Fairwood and asked them to go and represent IL&FS. Without telling state governments that these are not our employees, we are sending Fairwood, and Fairwood would go there as IL&FS, discuss projects, design. In fact, Mr. Das recollects that he and his team went and met senior bureaucrats, including the Chief Secretary of Karnataka, for the Bangalore Development Plan as part of IL&FS. Not one officer of IL&FS bothered to accompany the team. Now, IL&FS had such an aura of being super successful and also portrayed itself like a public sector giant, though it was a public-private partnership and entirely private, because it was not even open to the kind of sunlight that public limited companies have and the disclosures that they make. So when Gift City was about to start, Sudhir Mankad, who even now is the chairman of Gift City, Mr. Hari Shankaran, who was then the vice chairman of IL&FS, called Mr. Ranveer Das, and I'm going to call him Ranu Das because that's how he's known, called Ranu Das to come and attend that meeting as Team IL&FS again. So he was in the IL&FS office, part of this discussion, when the Gift City team of top bureaucrats came there for a discussion. They wanted to set up an SEZ for financial services. So after hearing what they had to say in the meeting, when the group broke up for lunch, Mr. Das said, I think an SEZ is rather limiting. Why not build a world-class city like Shanghai or Songdo of South Korea? Now, Mr. Das was then working with ABB, which is East China Architectural Design and Research Institution Company. He was working on Vietnamese projects, and ABB is credited with building substantial chunks of Shanghai and helping with the design. Songdo is a super modern city built entirely from scratch on reclaimed land. So Mr. Das said, why don't we build something like this? And Hari liked the idea. He proposed it to the Gujarat team. They liked the idea and went away. After that, Hari said, so how do we go about building a new city? Obviously, he didn't have the expertise, like I've said before. And he loved to make a splash, impress the Gujarat government. They were impressed. Now, Mr. Das is the one who put together, first of all, a tour to say, come and look at it. He took Hari Shankaran to Shanghai. Then he took him to the 88th floor of Jinmar Towers, which has a bird's eye view of the sprawling city, and they stood there and discussed which parts of it to adopt for Gujarat and what would work in India. Then they went to Seoul, went and saw Songdo because Mr. Das was working with another partner there. Mr. Hari Shankaran was suitably impressed, even more impressed when he came back and said, calls him Ranu Das. Ranu, put together a team, let's set up this consortium. So Fairwood went about creating a global consortium of 9 or 10 companies, which included ABB-Europe, British Telecom, Louis Berger, Hewitt, all kinds of very well-known global names. And things had to move really fast because remember, this was Gujarat and it liked to showcase large projects, and the Chief Minister then was very keen on laying the foundation stone in June 2007. IL&FS needed to deliver, there was no time to waste. So Fairwood was being pushed to start working on a master plan without even a formal contract because all that would take time. Mr. Das insisted on a simple letter. He got it, and in good faith, because they saw IL&FS as a friend, a partner, someone who had worked on 12 projects without incidents so far, went ahead, and this of course was the biggest and most prestigious. Remember, Mr. Modi has now become the Prime Minister, so if they had pulled it off, it was a big deal for Fairwood. So one doesn't blame them for wanting to start work on assurances, because nobody at that time, remember, especially outsiders, knew how hollow IL&FS was. Again, typical of IL&FS, Hari Shankaran kept exhorting Mr. Das to make it bigger and bigger. So Mr. Das tells me, if electricity requirement was 720 megawatts, Mr. Shankaran wanted it at 1000. If water requirement was 12 mgd, that's million gallons a day, he would say make it 20 mgd. When I say, do you want 3 levels of underground basement, he would say yes. Do you want 1, 2 or 3 levels of underground basements? He would say make 3 levels. All this of course costs money. Then came Vibrant Gujarat 2007. The Gift City stall was built by Akadi. The Chinese, American and Korean members of the consortium had speaking slots. The stall attracted a lot of attention, and there was so much interest that MOUs were signed for 200 million square feet as against a planned construction of 144 million. So IL&FS began to see dreams of making money. Now remember, this was a 50-50 joint venture. The land came from the Gujarat government, IL&FS was to manage, and IL&FS had found a way of sucking all the profits and raking in the money on every piece of land that it had got free, and yet charge all kinds of fees. I have said all of this in previous blogs. Those of you interested should go back and look at it. Now, the stunning part is how Ravi Parsati planned to extract a per square foot, per unit price on this free land that was acquired from the Gujarat government. Okay, so he wanted to sell. He thought he had a unique, brilliant idea for real estate: sell units of built-up area to be rebuilt on a square foot basis. So the original plan, since there was a lot of interest, was IL&FS would do all the building, make all the profits, and then sell it. So development rights would be sold on unit per square foot and traded on the exchange. This obviously meant that the idea had to be taken to SEBI, and SEBI needed to approve it. SEBI refused to approve the plan. That caused a lot of delay. Then the buildings were supposed to be super tall, and those of you would have seen photos. We're going to show you some of them. They were really fancy, and that needed approval from the Aviation Ministry, which those days worked in a curious way, and so the approvals never came. So 2 important parts of the project failed. IL&FS could not get the height plans for the buildings, and the funding plan based on per unit failed. And then the bigger disaster, 2008 global crisis, followed by a real estate crisis. So none of the MOUs signed in Vibrant Gujarat materialized, and the project was looking too big, unviable, had to be scaled down. Suddenly it went from Shanghai to Navi Mumbai, and with Ramakant Jha, who is part of Navi Mumbai, being in charge, it is no surprise. Typically, IL&FS also began to look for scapegoats. So it stopped paying Fairwood's bills, kept making assurances, started asking for explanation, blame game. Finally, at a one-to-one meeting in Gurgaon, K. Ramchand, an IL&FS director on Gift City, openly accused Mr. Das of cheating and claimed that Fairwood had increased the floor area because the consulting fee was based on the number of units. According to Mr. Das, his brazen allegation was made despite documentation showing that IL&FS had at each stage been given 3 options and chosen one, and it was minuted. He also says that Mr. Ramchand demanded a 25% cut in Fairwood's fees. Now, he actually told me that he wanted a kickback, which he flatly refused. Then he went back and told the board that Fairwood had agreed to a 25% cut in fees, which he says he had not, because there was no question of paying fees when he had passed on the money to consortium members. The fees did not go to Fairwood. Fairwood was a consortium. It had to pay all the other members for the work that they had done. So they couldn't have asked these global companies to give the money back. Obviously, there was an impasse. Things went downhill very quickly after that. IL&FS filed a case against Fairwood of 5,800 crore. Again, typical. Mr. Das alleges without any backup or details. As part of the arbitration and various court papers, it has now become clear that Fairwood actually may have been a scapegoat because the project had become unviable. So here's what minutes of the 31st meeting of the Board of Directors clearly confirm. And I've seen this and I'm showing it to you over here. The minutes note that the project has undergone considerable changes. GIFT City, or rather IL&FS, no longer plan to develop and sell the buildings because they weren't looking as lucrative as earlier. So under the changed scenario, private developers would be called in, they would do the building themselves, and GIFT City would only provide the broad planning details. It also confirms Mr. Das's claim that all their work based on the original plan had gone waste and considerable changes were required. Now, the fact that there were changes required means that there was a plan to start with, a master plan, which had to be redesigned or scaled down. Despite its very close relationship with IL&FS, it had absolutely no qualms ditching it and making a series of allegations. I find this story plausible because I have reported a similar modus operandi with other partners as well. Mr. Das insists that he has plenty of documents and evidence and photographs to prove his case. He has been in the room with the Prime Minister making a presentation while the IL&FS team was making a presentation. So claims that he was never there and Fairwood wasn't around and had done nothing would be hard to justify. But what is difficult and what Mr. Das has no control over is whether the arbitration will happen in any kind of, it's already 10 years, will ever be completed and whether it will be fair. Now, you readers may recall that DC Anjaria, a former board member, who was also there at that first meeting with IL&FS on the financial SEZ, he has made a lot of allegations about what has happened and filed a public interest litigation. We have written multiple articles, showing you links over here. You can look at my previous video blogs on this. So there are two different stories, both pretty bizarre, both showing how IL&FS worked, how unprofessional it was, how it had no oversight, no control, and the Gujarat government, with 50% stake, having given public land, had shown absolutely no oversight. Do bureaucrats pay? No. Mr. Sudhir Bankad actually is the man who was there from the beginning, then as Chief Secretary maybe, now as Chairman of GIFT City. He ought to have been able to clarify who's right and who is wrong and where do these two stories match and be fair. After all, he's a government official. Remains Chairman, silent about all of this because a small Fairwood can be buried. Large IL&FS is already buried and you're fighting a government. So why would any bureaucrat do anything that's going to affect them enjoying the perks of high-profile post-retirement assignments? If anything, an editorial interview by Ajay Pandey, former CMD of GIFT City, only establishes how Gujarat bureaucrats were completely under the thumb of IL&FS right until it crash landed. This interview, in the form of a paid advertisement, appeared literally a month before IL&FS began to default in a big way and just crash landed, creating a crisis in the entire financial system. Let's hope there is some arbitration and justice and this becomes a lesson for others to follow. Otherwise, it will be a sad story of how smaller consultants and consortiums which work with large companies will always lose out and lose out badly. If you like this video, please share it because people need to know how this company how this large consortium worked, and don't expect anybody to protest, because we don't protest about far bigger things, but at least the truth should be out there. Thank you.